Hello guys, how are you? Welcome to the first video lesson of the week number 14. I think that we're almost done with everything. I want to thank you in advance for all your attention, for your dedication, which has been essential to approach this process in this virtual way that we have carried out so far. I think this is going to be the last video lesson. Maybe probably I will post another video in the final week, but that will be mostly for general indications or something like that. Maybe, or maybe I'll just write them. Let's see how it comes. But this will be the last one related to content, right? To let's say topics that we're supposed to cover, and of course the skills and abilities associated to it. So this is going to be focused specifically on the journalistic discourse. So if you can be so kind and go to the slide number 130, you will see that we have a title over there that is the journalistic discourse. Of course, I have to clarify that we are going to cover the most basic or the most essential characteristics of this discourse. We're not particularly interested into amplify it a lot. There are a lot of journalistic genres and subgenres that are quite interesting, but we're going to be focused on, just as I mentioned, the essential one. Related to normally articles and some other things, right? If you want to go deeper into this, well, you're welcome to explore. There are a lot of resources on the internet. Let's say the best way to approach this sort of discourse, if you are interested in those, is go directly to the source, to the websites of newspapers, magazines, and some other journalistic media. Okay. Well, if we take a look at it, you will see that this is typically used to report news stories in newspapers. That is the one that we are going to be more concentrated about or on. But also remember that we're dealing with a discourse, and this discourse can be either oral or written. So also it can be used, this journalistic discourse, into television broadcast in another way. Now you also know that most of the television broadcasts have a script, so we can even say that it might be written somehow as well, right? Maybe discussing about writing in orality, or orality in writing. On radio programs, we have these radio emissions that, of course, also possess these different characteristics that we are going to discuss. Podcasts and some other ones that are dedicated to this sort of content, maybe good examples as well. And of course, on serious internet sites. So we have some internet sites that may be dedicated to journalism or journalistic reports, chronicles, and things like that, right? Now, what are some characteristics of journalistic discourse? We have usually short sentences and short paragraphs, right? The idea is that the reader may inform himself or herself by reading, let's say, dynamically. This, or was it dynamic? I forgot. But any of those, right? In a quick way, and let's say in a time-effective way, the information, and that's why most of the style that is journalistic tends to be direct, short, and let's say skip a lot of the usual introductions and some other things that are a little bit more academic or let's say related to other kind of text. Information has wide appeal and is easily understandable. What does it mean, wide appeal? Well, this is a little bit subjective, but in general terms, what it tries to convey is the fact that normally is attractive for everybody. Now, we know that something to be attractive for everybody is almost impossible, but in terms of generalizations, we're going to see in journalistic discourse some texts, articles, or interventions that are normally of the concern of everybody, right? Economical, political, social, health, technology, all these different things, right? So that is normally what we expect to see when we sort of approach a journalistic discourse. Of course, well, nowadays we have a lot of journalistic approaches to showbiz and fashion, or let's say entertainment, yes, that may not seem too relevant to everybody, but nevertheless they have this wide appeal. There are a lot of people interested in that, and it is supposed to be easily understandable. Okay, so we do not use a lot of figures of speech, comparisons, elaborate language. I mean, it is serious and maybe technical sometimes, but it is usually very direct. Okay, we don't find over here like comparisons or this figurative language, because what we want to do is to provide a very clear message, right? Most of the times we're dealing with supposedly objective messages. So I think that is why we try to omit these figures that are usually present in other types of discourse. Quickly gets to the point. So as I mentioned, not a lot of introductions. We're trying to provide description, information about or exposition about an event. So if we just have a really long introduction and we don't get to the point, so the reader is more likely to be distracted or not interested into what we are supposed to say. Now we have these WH questions, right? At least the 5 WH questions that we require to answer are supposed to be included in the first 2 paragraphs, right? Let's imagine that we have a 4, 5, 6 paragraph article, news, or something similar. So the WH questions are supposed to be answering that span of text. So what happened, who, where, or was involved, why, well, etc. Right? So we're supposed to at least answer more or less 5 WH questions, right? Sometimes, especially in the case of let's say criminal related articles or some other things, well, it is some identities are not clear, or it might be risky, like to signal them because of lack of evidence, or let's say security reasons. And well, for example, in those cases it is common to omit the who, or at least to only suggest it, or saying presumably, it seems, rather than a strong affirmation. But in general terms, the idea is that we are able to solve those questions in the first 2 paragraphs. Normally these include quotes from people who are witnesses or part of the story. That is very, very important. Remember that we're dealing with credibility over here. So including the testimonies, the things that people said, is going to be essential, right? In order to obtain or guarantee this sort of credibility in our journalistic approach. So in this case, it means that we are going to include quotes, and we're going to use specific punctuation marks that are essential for quoting, right? It is written in third person, 99% of the time. Sometimes, as I mentioned before, we have like chronicles that are a little bit more personal, but in general we are going to use third person most of the times, right? And this final part that is questionable, right? That is an objective text. We have already talked about objectivity when we dealt with descriptions. So we know that it might be a little bit tricky to maintain objectivity, but that is at least the intent, right? A journalistic test is supposed to be characterized by relying on facts and evidence, on leaving out just raw opinions or emotional appeals. There is a sort of journalism that is a little bit more the tabloid journalism that appeals to these sort of emotional things, and let's say scandal and some other things. But in general terms, we're supposed to rely on facts, evidence, on hard evidence when we're writing or providing some sort of variation of the journalistic discourse. Okay, so these are some of the characteristics. Please take them into account because, the assignment of this week will be producing a journalistic test. So I recommend that you take into account all of these characteristics and let's say features of journalistic discourse when you are going to write it. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was the first part. In the second one, we're going to deal with some of the parts of this journalistic test that we are going to try to write this week. Okay, thanks a lot. See you.